Kenya has applied for a new IMF lending program after abandoning the ninth review of its current $3.6 billion deal, citing time constraints rather than unmet targets. Well, joining me for more on this, I have Professor XN Iraki, economist, University of Nairobi. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me today.
Hello, good afternoon.
All right. Now, the Finance Minister said the decision to stop the review was down to time limitations, denying whatever it was, as some other person said. And apart from that, we also have Bloomberg report last week saying that Kenya abandoned the ninth review because it failed to meet the required target. But talk to us. Do you have insights into what actually happened, or should we believe what the government has said?
If you look at Kenya's economy today, with a background of 2024, we had the so-called Generation Z riots on the street of Nairobi. And one of the things that came up during those Generation Z riots was about IMF. They were saying that some of the taxes the government was imposing on Kenyans was brought by IMF. So I suspect that one of the reasons why this conversation between the government of Kenya and IMF has stopped is because there are certain conditions that IMF has put that may be politically sensitive. So that if they are imposed on Kenyans, there might be some political reactions, just like last year. One of them has been mentioned, is the restructuring of Kenya Airways. The other has been the issue of pricing petroleum products. So I think until the deal comes on the table, my suspicion is the conditions given by IMF are politically sensitive, and the government is very much aware of that.
All right. Well, Kenya tried to raise taxes. You talked about that anyway, and we saw what happened. I mean, that was met with stiff resistance. So beyond taxes, talk to us about what other options are available to the country in terms of, having to sort of manage its revenue so far.
I think there are two options that are open to the government, and some of them are quite creative, because instead of the government calling them taxes, the government has been calling them levies. So they are taxes in another way, but they are more politically palatable. The other way the government has tried to approach to try and bridge the budget deficit is very simple: reduce the cost of the government, reduce the government expenditure. But that has not been very successful, because if you reduce the government expenditure, you are saying some government workers should go home, some programs should go home, some projects should be closed, and that again brings in some political sensitivity. That approach has been to tackle corruption. That has not been very successful. But I believe that instead of raising taxes, instead of borrowing more money, the government should probably live within its means, and that will probably put less pressure on raising taxes, and that will not be politically sensitive.
When you say the government should probably live within its means, we need to begin to then ask how much or what can the government afford within its means? Won't that also affect infrastructure development? Won't it also affect maybe some social safety nets and all of that? What do you think?
But that's the problem, because if the government lives within its means, it means that you have to reduce the number of people employed by the central government, the number of people employed by the county governments, the number of people employed maybe abroad, and so on. And that has political implications. So the problem is that the government does not behave like a private company, because when a private company is having problems with wages, with costs, some people can be told to go home, and that reduces the wage substantially. But the government can't do that. So when I talk about the government leaving its means, it's not something that is supposed to be like a switch. Probably it is a long-term plan. For example, the people who are retiring are not replaced. Some jobs that are not very necessary are eliminated. But if you do it as a big bang, I'm sure there will be political implications.
All right. So I would like you to first talk to us about the primary factors that are contributing to, Kenya's ongoing struggle to rein in its fiscal deficit and boost revenue collection. And add to that, I'd also like you to talk to us about how sustainable Kenya's debt-to-GDP rate of 65.7% is.
I think the biggest issue that is raising all the issues about deficits and so on happens to be the government expenditure. And one of the biggest government expenditure happens to be wages and salaries. If you look at the government report in the county level, at the national level, and you ask where does the money go that is collected by the government, there are probably two major costs. One of them is paying debts. One time we had about 60% of the government revenues going to pay debts. The other money goes to pay wages and salaries. That means in the long run, we don't have enough money left to look at the development, to improve the productive capacity of the economy. And to me, that is not very good. That's why the government has under pressure to adjust the physical and monetary policies to make sure that more money goes to development and build the economic capacity of the economy. But that has had some political resistance. Now, when you talk about 67% of the GDP, I don't think that is sustainable, because at the end of the day, a lot of money is going to pay the debt, which is 67% or something of the GDP. That money would be going to take care of other government projects, education, things like health, things like highways, things like other socio-economic programs. So a lot of money is moving away from very essential services and going to pay debts. But the biggest problem is, if we don't pay debts, then we cannot get more money in the future. And the only alternative to get to debt would be to raise taxes. And people don't want to raise taxes. That's why I always suggest that the best approach would be to reduce the government expenditure, reduce some of the costs that can be done away with, and of course, very important, reduce corruption. That will make us live within our means.
All right. In less than 30 seconds, we know we have $800 million still on the table from, the 9th review that has now been stopped. What are your expectations for this new program in about 30 seconds?
I'm sure the government and the IMF are going to negotiate, and they're going to come up with an amicable program so that the government gets this money. I think the government needs money for budget support. The government needs money for development programs. The government needs money to make sure that at the end of the day, we can also pay our debts. So I'm sure they're going to negotiate, and I'm almost sure they are going to come up with an amicable program. But at the back of this negotiation, I can tell you for free, there will be some political implications. They are thinking that whatever we come up with, it must not be politically sensitive because of the way we had Generation Z going on the streets last year.
Well, it's my hope that that's sorted at the end of the day. And I'm just looking forward to, maybe we need to have more conversations between the government and the people, especially the Generation Z you're talking about. Anyway, thank you so much, Professor, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, and have a good afternoon.